The following review is rated VG-18. It contains violence, sexual themes, and overly analytical nerd bullshit. If you can't handle radical stuff, get the hell out of here. Oh yeah, that's the old man's work, no doubt. What makes someone do that to such a nice kid, no older than 12 or 13? The answer is burnout. Now what happens when you burn out? What happens when you have to just grind on along the metal rail of life? As much as we want our human selves to be infinite, put simply, they ain't. I'm not going to debate philosophy or the human soul here. It's a matter of stamina. As much as you can throw your back out lifting boxes, an artist can throw out, their brain. That's the burnout. Trust me, I've been there. As the stress of making things pushes you further and further, you start to feel dread. Anxiety builds in your gut, and your old monkey mind releases ungodly amounts of cortisol into your blood. Part 5, Golden Wind, of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, was Araki burning out. He began it on December 11th, 1995. Less than a week after Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, finished. And what happened? The pacing is iffy, the big betrayal of Panakata Fugo was cut, and his character felt kind of pointless. But why? Because Araki was burning out, in a bad place, and just couldn't subject his characters to suffering. When the Wachowskis made The Matrix 4, on the back of my tongue I could taste that it lacked that apocalyptic grimness of the first 3 movies. Love triumphs, and the world feels like it's just lacking that previous, that machine octopus razor's edge, that screaming rage against the machine. Why? Because the Wachowskis had lost both their parents and a few friends from the pandemic just before making it. Even with years since the last film, driven to restart something they had previously thought done, the smoldering, lingering smell of charred rubber that is burnout hung over that film. That's what burnout can do to an artist. All the polite civil normality gets sanded down. Sanded down by, come on, just do it again, you did it before, right? The old man was right the hell there. Don't believe me? In Gundam Great Complete Works Part 2, he said as much. 10 years ago, when I made F91, I thought there probably wouldn't be any more Gundam after that. I originally understood F91 as the first installment of a new TV series, but it didn't work out, and it was a work we couldn't continue. At that point, I felt even more strongly that Gundam was over than I did at the end of First Gundam. So after that, I didn't expect them to say, we have to do another Gundam. See what I mean? Because that's the thing. When you push someone, when you push an artist to play it again, say the line, Bart, weird things happen. Complexes, ideas, hang-ups, scars very old and deep emerge. The end result? Mobile Suit Victory Gundam. Here, I won't beat about the bush. This review isn't gonna exactly be like the old ones. As to why, you'll see as our story unfolds. But for now, I'm gonna cut right to the jugular. First though, the fine folks who got me this far, who helped me ride down Old Man T's long and sordid road, deserve thanks. Once more, Mark Simmons made this possible. This will be our final outing with his amazing resource, and as always, it will be linked below. As always as well, a big thanks to my buddies at ZettaiJapan. It took me nigh on 6 years, but this trail of dried blood is now at its last animated stop in the Universal Century. As well, of course, Konanne has been great for digging deep into even more of what I wouldn't have considered. So thanks for all the background deep dives. And of course, should you like what I do here, my Patreon will also be linked below. More gas in my tank makes videos like these possible and has fueled me to get here today. Alternatively, if you enjoy science fiction stories and strange alien lands, my visual novel, Volt on the Electromagnetic Planet, as well as my brand new short story compilation, The Prince in Orange, are on itch.io and linked below. As last thanks, of course, Skuttlefish, who finances these expeditions, and the great patrons who gave me a hand getting here, like all the folks in Elvis's promised land. Lucas Machin, DeepStateNine, Rylan Browner, Rendar, Francisco Esqueda, Luis Correa, Domestica 1664, Cake, Andrew Zigas, Speed King Oz, Mike Murdoch, Excelsis Kali, Koropiko, Miracle Majutsu, Tree Tea, Victorine, Julian Johnson, JXP, Kid Z, AJ Brown, Genzino, I Feed My Atlas Green Chicken, Carl Hagar, Not Very Subtle, Arctic Arduino, Ethan Banks, Osokin 1, Metal Dragon, Matthew Totaro, Golgari Soul, Marcus Aaron Stroud, Alfarius Omegon, Thermidor Starva, John L., Emil, Maverlin, Stephen Dakek, Michael Brenz, Five Marks, Jesus Avila, Ethanton, Daniel Perez, Lost Cosmonaut, Freshbone, Robert, Tonsider, Butt Prime, Arsen Osokin, Fabian Borges, USS ZILLA NCC 1998, John L., and Gabagool. With those thanks, we return. What is responsible? The inciting incident? Well, the Gunpla, naturally. Victory Gundam's producer, Masuo Ueda, spoke about this in a Twitter thread, saying directly that, following First Gundam, we'd produced real Gundams such as Zeta, Devil Zeta, and Char's Counterattack, 0080, F91, and 0083. But while these were unable to match the sales of the old days, a certain fad called SD Gundam, that's Super Deformed Gundam, had taken the market by storm. Sunrise was horrified when its sales were briefly 4 times those of real plastic models. Under the name of Gundam, content over which the original creator Sunrise had no control was winning the support of the children. The editor-in-chief of a publishing company, central to this context, even said that the era of real Gundam was already over. There was much debate about this situation, but Sunrise decided not to intervene. For a creator, this was a defeat. And then, as the production of 0083 was nearing its end, the question of what to do for the next Gundam came up at a board meeting. The company's business situation was good. Gundam royalties were coming in, and Takura and Tommy's works were doing well, as was City Hunter. Nevertheless, the meeting was shrouded in a heavy atmosphere. This heavy atmosphere was the pressure that we felt. The then president concluded that now, it had expanded into theatrical films and OVAs. Of course, Gundam's future was a new TV series, but who would be in charge of it? After a brief silence from the 3 executives responsible for production, he said, "Then you're in charge, Ueda. I'd be working with director Tomino again, for the first time in 10 years. Of course, it's impossible not to see the corporate Shoggoth motivation here. Toymaker Bandai was literally buying out animation studio Sunrise in 1994. Putting aside your warm, beating heart and human blood for a moment, thinking like a Corpo Shoggoth with icy thick ichor, it makes complete, soulless sense. Who cares if Gundam was done? Who cares if F91 failed? We, Bandai, now Bandai Sunrise, make money from selling plastic to those humans. Anime exists to generate the demand for that plastic pushed into whatever shapes are on display. Stories about failure, and about victory, about love and death in the future of humankind, about hope, about suffering. Worthless, pointless, all that matters is more plastic sales. So dig up that Yoshiyuki Tomino. Like a creeping black mass of putrid organs, the now Bandai Sunrise thing, noticing a downward trend in sales, and knew only one thing: to sell plastic space robots, not an SD, you need an animated space robot Gundam thing. And to address the shrinking hunger pains of a certain demographic, we need a new space robot show now. From Gundam Great Complete Works Part 2. While Gundam focused mainly on the development of toys, whose acceptance was based on the lower grades of elementary school, OVA works were targeted at hardcore fans from the middle and high school up. This created a demographic gap between the upper elementary grades and middle school. Thus, another TV series was planned, as a new Gundam with broad appeal to this age group. This was Mobile Suit Victory Gundam, which was broadcasted for 1 year starting in 1993. And so, that led to the direct competition with the Brave series, which is how, however, the Brave series, sponsored by Takara, was airing at the same time slot used by previous Mobile Suit Gundam series, 5:30 p.m. Saturdays on Nagoya TV. And so it couldn't be broadcasted in the traditional time slot. Thus it was decided to change the flagship station to TV Asahi and broadcast it at 5 p.m. on Fridays. As the rest of this video occurs, as we go into the after effects of Old Man T coming to grips with this, I want you to keep that in mind. As far as the now newly fermented Bandai Namco went, the point was to get 8 to 14-year-old kids coming home on Friday after school at 5 p.m. to watch 13-year-old Uso Ewan here end up like this. But that's just the first domino. Of course, you know me. We are going in deep on this one, as always. I'll be frank. I do kinda still love Victory, but it's also kind of a mess. But that's exactly what I love. As to why, well, hop on. You'll damn well find out with me in this On Gundam. On April 2nd, 1993, Victory Gundam premiered. More importantly, two things happened beforehand which you cannot ignore if you really want to know how we got what we got. To returning viewers, I apologize, but like Dean Martin singing Everybody Loves Somebody, they're just too good for me not to come back to. During early 1992, the Japanese bubble economy finally burst, and the start of what now has been 3 lost decades and lost generations began. And in August and across 1991 and 92, the former Union of Socialist Soviet Republics ceased to exist. One of the world's great powers disintegrated visibly. Fukuyama notoriously proclaimed that the Earth would stop spinning. If you think really hardly about these two things, it's easy to see that they basically kinda led to Victory Gundam. Well, I'll be nice and say it's okay. Some folks are young, others aren't too aware. So, from the Zeonic Scans translation of the V Gundam project proposal. Project Intention. The world that surrounds TV anime is by no means rosy. Its hardships are evident to everyone. During economically challenging times, people often become serious, yet they inevitably seek an outlet. One could imagine this is no different in the world of children. Moreover, while the Gundam series itself has accumulated over a decade of history, and faces a major turning point, we have also concluded that it is by no means pointless to inherit this name as a way of responding to the harsh environment. However, there was also a consensus among the staff that, while still being Gundam, a return to the roots of anime, catering to the young, was necessary. The bitterness is there in the background. You can almost smell it like acrid coffee grounds. The context of Japan dealing with its, now as they say and said, less than rosy world. But ecologically, also this tone of elder generation's regret permeates. Story theme. What have we adults forgotten? What are the mistakes we've committed? We want to tell a story of a young boy and girl tasked with constructing a bright, hopeful future amid the destructive tension between an environmentally devastated Earth and warring space colonies. It's about conveying what we need to do while expressing apologies from our generation to the next for our actions that have led to the Earth's current state. We want this narrative to seek understanding from the younger generation, presenting alternative ways of thinking and living. Now, as to the breakup of the USSR, here, unlike in other works, I have pretty direct evidence it was on their mind, from the same proposal. Story background. The Gundam world is akin to an interstellar age of civil wars, with various space colonies opposing the bureaucratic, centralized approach of the Earth Federation government. Echoing the dissolution process of the modern-day Soviet Union, rising within this milieu, the Zanskar Empire is Site 2, with its matriarchal rule and queen as sovereign, is poised to dominate this epoch. But behind its outward gentleness and antiquity lay the iron fist of the Gatti Party and their military force, Vespa. Over half of the hundreds of space colonies inside 2 were governed by their influence, beyond the reach of the Earth Federation government, and independence movements in other sides, inspired by Zanskar's success, intensified. As this story begins, Zanskar was on the brink of becoming the dominant power, intending to control Earth, the cradle of humanity, to supersede the Earth Federation government. The world of Gundam, its far-off future of UC-153, was being interpreted via the contemporary context of Japan and its creators were experiencing. Indeed, in that proposal, the description of the rotting Federation rump state coming apart as it fell back on brutal crackdowns to stifle independence and independence movements seems taken right from the news images of Moscow in the final days of the USSR. Time has passed since the turbulent era of the Crossbone Vanguard, and the movement to obtain sovereignty among each of the space colonies have given rise to countless conflicts around the lunar orbit, humanity's living space. These conflicts spewing forth humanity's primal instincts that had been suppressed by modern thought, manifested reckless chaos. It was impossible to govern the vast area expanded by hundreds of space colonies with a single centralist organization. Still, it's not unreasonable to think that at the beginning of the space colony era, the Earth Federation government was seen as a necessary organization for humanity to maintain its identity in the infinite expanse of space. The headquarters of the Earth Federation government was located in Luna Metropolitan, on the far side of the moon. They dispatched the Earth Federation forces to medicate the conflicts between space colonies. But given the multitude of disputes, their efforts were like trying to douse a bonfire with a cup of water. This, then, is the setup of our story of Victory Gundam. The proposal outlines how, amidst this dissolution, the task of restoring the Earth, which was the Federation's mandate, became warped by the corruption of the organization and its preferable treatment of the Federation elite. In the end, the way it describes the end of the Federation is a merging of Gundam's space ecology, its overview effect world, with the very real-life disintegration of large states like the USSR. In comparison to F-91's setup, I think it's a much more interesting, and at the time, deeply relevant one for the basis of another Gundam. With that, we arrive at Mobile Suit Victory Gundam, Episode 1, which of course is actually Mobile Suit Victory Gundam, Episode 4. As the Victory Gundam New Type 100% Collection interview with TV Asahi producer Yoshiaki Koizumi says, "In short, the first episode began with Uso and Chronicle meeting in Casserelia, and the entire form of the Gundam mobile suit wasn't shown on screen until Episode 4. However, at the point when the broadcast time was determined, we decided to reconsider the structure. That's because we thought that, for a work airing at 5 o'clock, it would be awkward if the main character didn't show up for 3 episodes. Now I think about it, that may have been a groundless worry. But on a production site, you're aware that you can't just create whatever you like, with no thought of how to deal with the reality that the work is being broadcast. Thus we had no choice but to discuss it. Considering its impact as a robot show, we started by deciding to move Episode 4, which could serve as a showpiece, up to the first episode. We adopted the format of Shakti's memories as a linking device purely out of craftsmanship. I don't think it was very skillfully done, since it was a makeshift job. But to the extent that it can be done this way, personally, I have confidence in this method of organization. One good thing that came from this is that the character of Shakti became clearer than in the original structure, and together with her catchphrase, "Please watch it," in the trailers, I'm proud that we were able to highlight Shakti. With her mentioned now, I guess it's as good a time as any to mention our main 2 characters. First up is our pilot child and poor bastard, Uso Ewan, voiced by Daisuke Sakaguchi, then only into his 2nd year of voice acting. And our main female deuteragonist is Shakti Karin, voiced by Yumi Kuroda. Very quickly over the somewhat awkward first few episodes, we establish the basic outline and dynamic of these characters and the setting. Uso and Shakti are basically 2 kids living out on what is an illegal remote home on Earth, migrated there from space by their parents, but both abandoned at story's start. The military forces of Zanskar, namely Bespa, have already launched a partial invasion of Earth, and the Federation's elite have essentially ignored or failed to deal with it entirely. This leaves only the resistance force of the Ligue Militaire, French for, Military League, to fight back. Already we see the generational element from the proposal come forward, as the elderly technicians and resistance organizers are a contrast to the younger members. Marbit Fingerhat, voiced by Ayako Shiraishi, is the generational bridge to the younger members, like Odalo Henrik, voiced by Masayuki Nakata, as well as Warren Trace and Suzy Rylan. We also see the atrocities of Zanskar in their indiscriminate assault on the city of Wuwig, the home of a very special character, Katajina Luce. But we will focus on her later. In general, the characters mostly hang around and fight to defend Casarelia. The plotting here is very slow to start, as Uso and Shakti sort of resist being outright drawn into the conflict. They try over and over to return home. Uso eventually ends up piloting the Victory Gundam. Now there is a bunch to say about that machine, but as usual it will get its own section later on. For now, the two most fascinating aspects of this Gundam in regards to the setting are that it's so blatantly mass-produced, and that it returns to something only Double Zeta did before, namely the Getter Robo DNA of a combination of 3 parts. Now, as I'm sure, really absolutely sure, there has been a question any older viewers and first-timers share. It's the one already in your mind right now. I know it is. Argenbold, isn't this Eastern Europe? Isn't this literally Czechia? What's with all the Czech stuff? What race are these people? What the hell is going on with these character names? I know, right? So, here, in the Blu-ray box set, Tomino commented on just that. Speaking of Eastern Europe, I think you could say that that's one of the places that really made an impression on the post-Cold War world, through things like the war in Yugoslavia. Was Victory Gundam influenced by the post-Cold War situation? Tomino: not particularly. It wasn't directly related to the end of the Cold War, but rather because I was thinking about the gap between those who plan wars and those standing on the battlefield. That's something I've been pondering since Gundam. As for the feeling of Eastern Europe, all that overland travel in the first half was because I was trying to give a sense of the continuity of Europe's neighboring lands. But in the end, that kind of depiction couldn't be properly digested in the form of a robot anime. Argon, didn't you just say Victory was directly influenced by the post-Cold War situation? Yes, because the proposal directly cited that. So, here, maybe Tomino was just saying that specifically the Yugoslav breakup wasn't the main element? After all, Victory would only come out 2 years into the then 10 to 15 year conflict, depending on where you think that it ends and starts. But here's the thing. I think Tomino was attempting, at least, to channel what he saw as the deeper ethnic and cultural identity of the region. A region which, for those who know, is one broken up by now centuries of long regional wars defining the area. In which case, Victory Gundam got, lucky that probably the most violent episode in that history, in recent memory, happened literally during and after its production. As Tomino said from the Victory Gundam Volume 2, New Type 100% Collection. Interviewer: was there a reason why the setting placed Casarelia in Eastern Europe? Tomino: first and foremost, because it's the most challenging location for Japanese people. There's also the fact that it's an intersection of Europe and Asia. The latter is something the Japanese have finally come to understand due to things like the recent conflict in Yugoslavia. But that doesn't mean I chose it because of the significance of the position. When I was considering it in terms of human problems, I felt this was no longer an era for thinking in terms of ethnic homogeneity, and that's why I set that as the location. This was the ethnic identity and cultural context Tomino desired to channel, and is also why the first chunk of the show seems to waffle in the setting so much. Tomashe, Carol? Most people would chalk those up to Tomino names, but it's mostly just Czech. Perhaps the most egregious being, Buttstrafe, which is just the English subtitlers trying desperately to translate the Japanese pronunciation of Václav, which more recognizably to other folks is Wenceslas. Yes, the patron saint of Bohemia. Don't get me wrong, we got some Duker Ix and Chronicle Ashers, we got Tomino names. But some of this stuff is just Tomino channeling the home of goulash. Part of what makes all that interesting is, as Tomino said there, making the cast ethnically ambiguous. Showing that in his weird space future, he didn't want you to know, make a Gundam about a proud ethno-nationalist Czech resistance. Interviewer: Is that why you completely eliminated everything that might represent Japan? Tomino. Or alternatively, the Japanese flavor vanished because we were setting aside ethnic homogeneity. But characters appear with names like Oliver Inoue and Junko Genko, which means they have Japanese lineage mixed into their ancestry. And I wanted that to suggest the spread of ethnic groups as well. So in a strict sense, we haven't completely eliminated Japan, and personally, I'm proud that we were able to depict these characters' issues so well. Speaking of names, I guess I really should mention the fact that our main character is named No It Ain't Ewan. For those less familiar with Japanese, the word uso, written with this kanji, essentially means a lie, or an untruth. Perhaps the closest thing in English would be maybe the expression no way, both in the sense of something which is not, a negation, but also as an exclamation. So our main character is then called, Uso Ewan. Speaking on this from the Victory Gundam Blu-ray box. Interviewer, please tell us about Uso's name. Is Uso really derived from Uso as in lie? Tomino, that's right. All words are lies, so even if they seem true, words can turn into lies as you keep on repeating them. I remember it incorporated that kind of meaning, but calling him Uso would have been too harsh, so I decided to use the name Uso. Interviewer, then it doesn't mean that Uso is a lie because there are no good children like him. Tomino, correct. It doesn't mean that, but rather I gave that name with the implication that it symbolized the work itself. Now, this one, I really don't know. I don't know what Tomino's intention was here at all, really. The fact he went with the unstressed S version, so Uso instead of Uso, is like naming the main character Ain't It True Johnson instead of It Is Not True Johnson. Relative to the actual work, the only thing that lines up is the fact Uso exclaims in horror at the war moments he witnesses, "No, it can't be." Other than that, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. Returning though to the actual story and setup, I would say overall, I actually do think Victory did something very different from the typical Gundam formula. The Ligue Militaire being in essence a resistance movement, and the main characters being this hodgepodge of old and young, European and Asian names, dark skin and light skin, men and women. Even the plot mostly focusing on them, attempting to gather together their forces and resources, taking the various Gundam parts from the factories and trying to get them to a meeting point to establish a larger resistance army. Is it Fang of the Sun Dogram? Not quite, but it is, I think, interestingly done for a Gundam show. In this context, the Victory Gundam isn't the Super FX prototype like the RX-78, Zeta, and even the F-91 were. The Victory is more like the AK-47, or the Orlikon 20mm cannon, or the MiG-21, or the Sherman tank. Something mass-produced in vast quantities with fantastic capabilities. I will get into it more later, but once again, it contributes as well. Perhaps one moment which also particularly stuck out to me was during the battles around their home in Casarelia. Shakti goes out carrying the orphan baby from Zanskar's attack on Wuig, and tries to plant seeds. As huge mobile suits explode and crash all around, the effort seems futile. But it reminded me of the very propagandized video of the Ukrainian babushka giving sunflower seeds to the occupying Russian soldiers during the still ongoing war there, telling them that way, at least when they die, sunflowers will grow from their graves. Politics aside, I think it's a very impactful notion, trying to grow some life while all around you, conflict is hell-bent on destroying and ending it. As the episodes roll on, we have our main antagonist introduced as well, our Char-like in Chronicle Asher, and our current Tomino ultraviolet-haired bad bitch in Foala. We also see very early on the fact that Zanskar uses public executions as a form of intimidation towards the rotting Federation and the general populace. And Haro. Oh man, Victory's Haro may be the very best damn Haro in all of UC. It has gadgets, it helps out Uso, and is his battle buddy. It can project his own memories, somehow. It has a ton of personality, and even has the power to grow to the size of the Earth, which is suggested in the eye catch, but went unused in the series. Though this did kill a character just by implication. Truly an amazing Haro. So though it takes a few episodes, eventually the cast leaves Casarelia behind, and commit to joining the main Ligue Militaire resistance, at the rally point of Gibraltar, and its mass driver. But to wrap up this section, let's quickly mention the animation. as Victory would be a pretty interesting mix of staff for just that. Of course, we have the folks who fill familiar roles. Tomino, of course, is back as the main director and as scriptwriter. Shigemi Ikeda as a returning animation art director from his work on Double Zeta, L Game, Zabungle, and so on. Shuko Murase would return as well as an animation director after his previous work on F91. Hiroshi Osaka, who would be doing Victory's character design, also handled animation direction and corrections. Seo Yasuhiro, another Sakan, or animation director, also had worked on Akira and would later work on Steam Boy and Satoshi Kon's Millennium Actress. As well, the music of the very classically trained Akira Senju is pretty fantastic. I've got no complaints, and it's very solid all around. In the back of my head, I do sort of wonder if Senju was chosen specifically because of this kind of European context, with classical music being so emblematic of that. As far as I can see, I haven't been able to confirm that with any of the interviews, that's just kind of my hunch. Victory, interestingly, wouldn't have Zeta's job-specific mecha animation director role set in stone, rather popping up on an episode-by-episode basis. For example, the subcontracted Studio R had Moriyasu Taniguchi working on character animation and Toro Yoshida doing mecha animation. On one more interesting note, in addition to other subcontracted studios, like Studio Dean, Studio Gainax would also have Kazuya Tsuramaki help with animation direction. This is a big deal right now for those who remember, oh yeah, Tsuramaki is one of the main creative forces on Jikwakusu, airing also right friggin' now. Keiichi Sato, who you may remember from my Big O video, also was an animation director on the final episode. Now, when it comes to that animation, one thing people notice is the very odd use of shading and detail. A lot of Victory shots are animated with an obviously flat shading approach. That is, with often no other tones, just solid color. Only dramatic moments or explosions would get more than 2, 3, or a gradient. Returning staff member Koichi Inoue from the Sunrise Planning Office commented on just this for the Victory Gundam DVD. At the time, Victory Gundam was the first TV series in a while, wasn't it? Anyway, following the theatrical Mobile Suit Gundam F91 and the OVA Mobile Suit Gundam 0083, Mobile Suit Victory Gundam was planned as the first TV series in 6 years. Partly because they weren't TV series, F91 and 0083 were meant to represent the highest grade of Gundam visuals at the point in time. Since this TV series was following afterwards, it was important we find a way to give it a new appeal distinct from them. That was our intention in giving the characters a soft but substantial presence, like the so-called Masterpiece series. Here he means the classic anime adaptations of children's stories, which was the start of many careers including Miyazaki's and Tomino's, the World Masterpiece Theater series. Interviewer: in a sense, it was a challenge. Anyway, that's also one reason why there was no shading in the early part of the series, even though there was a tendency at the time to take on-screen shading as a given. It was produced via a process where shading was added only to the cuts where we really wanted it, as specified by director Tomino. Since around the time of F91, director Tomino himself had been giving instructions to reduce excess shading as much as possible, specifying it for each cut. His reasoning was that if we overdid it, it would make the screen too noisy. In essence, as TV and OVA anime progressed, an arms race of ever-increasing animation detail also occurred. The short production run OVAs could maximize this detail, as 0083 did. But in being a new 50-episode TV Gundam, especially one in the midst of a Japanese economic implosion, it isn't surprising that they then took an approach which effectively reset the level of detail to what a longer series could manage. In this way, Victory also set the bar for the following G, Wing, and X in terms of production detail. As one final quote though, this did pose an interesting challenge for those animator and directors. Yasuhiro Seo had this great bit from a New Type magazine interview. Interviewer: as someone responsible for the actual animation, what did you think of Uso and the other characters? Seo: in order to reduce the animation burden, Mr. Osuka designed the characters to be easy to draw, so I think that saved us a lot of working time and effort. But given the policy of omitting shading as much as possible, we were careful to avoid drawing layouts where the characters were then shown directly from the front or side, so that the drawing wouldn't end up looking featureless. Interviewer: wasn't it hard to show facial expressions without shading? Seo: there are lots of people who use shading in their drawings, so that may well be the case. Personally, I've never had a knack for adding shadows to my line drawings, so I didn't feel it was all that tough. But in that kind of situation, everything depends on the skill of the artist. For example, even if it's just a sitting pose, how you can differentiate it in the drawing. In that respect, I have some regrets that I couldn't fully achieve that as an animation director. Interviewer: it must have been a race against time. Seo: I had to let it go, even if I was somewhat dissatisfied, but it may have been a little malicious of director Tomino to make the characters so simple. We were also forbidden to animate on 2s. I guess animation without relying on those things is the most basic of basics. That, in essence, sums up the animation situation pretty well. Thanks once again to Konanne for informing me of a lot of it. Now, doesn't that sound like an interesting show? A Resistance Force Gundam, a young protagonist and his main love interest sucked into war, some interesting ideas of ethnicity and European identity. A show which tried to reset and simplify the animation back to a classic world masterpiece theater level. Ha! But you didn't really think I started the video the way I did if it was that. Did you really think it was going to be that straightforward? Hell no! Something weird starts happening as they leave Casarelia. Some new characters show up, namely a bunch of female characters. They also, just as fast, end up fucking dying. Because Victory Gundam is seriously whack. For nearly half of the 20th century, the films of the United States, the country with the single largest film industry as well, operated under a set of guidelines. They were known as the Hays Code. These guidelines were essentially a kind of social contract of sorts. Hollywood got the creative freedom to make stories. Stories in the days before widespread television, which had exclusive property in the American imagination, so long as they played by the rules. They couldn't take the Lord's name in vain. They couldn't show interracial couples. They couldn't show the distribution of drugs. They had to be careful about the US flag, about the portrayal of crimes, including sexual assault, arson, the use of firearms, and even just men and women in bed together. Any sexual organs of any kind, and violence carried out by knife or by gun or by fist. These notions seem absolutely quaint in today's society, where many of those things are now common in media. Where some of what are now called classics, the works of Spielberg like Jaws, Coppola's Godfather, any number of Christopher Nolan's films, Michael Mann's Heat, pretty much all of Tarantino's catalog, would absolutely violate some or even most of that code, and be banned from existing. The reason these classics exist, hell, the reason even cheesy action movies, crime dramas, passionate romance films, dude bro weed comedies, and so on exist, is because American culture changed. The baby boomers grew up, and they wanted to free themselves from their parents' restrictions and limits. That's why, in 1968, the Hays Code died, and the MPAA was born. If you have ever seen a PG-13, a rated R, or even an NC-17 before a trailer for a film, or after, that is the MPAA. Now, I could continue this story, but as you have no doubt guessed, this isn't a recounting of the history of American media. This is about a 1993 show called Victory Gundam. But the link, dear viewer, the link is what also happened because of the end of the Hays Code. Starting in the 1920s and 30s, but exploding in popularity in the 60s and 70s, a new, genre, if you can even call it that, emerged. The exploitation movie. The death of the Hays Code kicked it off into overdrive. Now, trying to define exploitation is not easy, so instead, I'm gonna fall back on my favorite metaphor. You know when you are driving, or if you've ever been in a car, and up ahead you see a parked ambulance and police cars and a turned over car indicating some kind of accident. You know those two feelings which bubble up. The one which goes, oh god, I hope they're okay. We're ignoring that one. It's the other one, the oh man, that's a lot of blood, but I can't look away. That feeling, that's exploitation. Low-budget films made by demented perverts. Anything with cannibals, Nazis, blood and sex and drugs, and this video sure as hell may end up demonetized because of just this section. Picture in your mind Danny DeVito in his slimiest voice telling you about the cheerleader blood typhoon genocide. Everything that would ever make great-grandma wring her Sunday church hat into a coiled rope with anger. Now here is where victory comes in, you see. Because in every previous review, I have basically been operating on a fairly simple premise. That what I am talking about, on its own, is a form of art. And that art should be taken seriously. If it mentions war, think seriously about war. If it mentions space colonies, climate change, gender or race or religion or so on, it needs to be given serious appraisal. But Victory Gundam is different. As I said, Victory Gundam is whack. Because what if instead of treating fictional characters with some depth and, degree of respect, what if we treated them as disposable blood bags or over-the-top vehicles for hyper-violence? What if we had a hell of a lot of fun? Because exploitation, gritty, grimy, gross movies is really, really fun. If you have ever laughed with delight at Doomguy ripping the head off a demon, if you love seeing Travis Touchdown cut guys into bloody ribbons, Chow Yun-Fat dive down a railing shooting both pistols, there's about 1,000 squibs of blood pop, it's fun! Movies where even women are just there to get their tits out and guys are there to die, I'm 22 years old, the year's 1975, I'm young, gas is cheap, I want to watch a movie called Death Race 2000 where the drivers get points for killing pedestrians and some boobies come out. But even there, the same feeling occurs, at least in me, and likely in you. The story about the shirtless Nazi blonde babe chainsawing a zombie's head off while her tits are covered in blood, this ain't art. But it's fun. And blaxploitation, oh baby blaxploitation, black folks who only ever got to show up in Hollywood movies as either black cops or background characters who weren't represented most of the time as, nothing more than thugs or hoodlums to be beaten or killed. Now they could be the main character. Shaft, Foxy Brown, Superfly, Across 110th Street, Blackula. And young Italian filmmakers take raucous delight at the incredibly lax post-war film code in Italy to create giallo. Vibrant, sensual, and bloody affairs like Profondo Rosso and Suspiria, titillating and exciting with terrible, terrible dubbing. They really love dubbing over their lines, even in Italian. Just whack. Even Hong Kong wuxia movies, while not directly part of the same heritage as, say, American and Italian exploitation, still took advantage of that same gut feeling. To be over the top, intense and bloody and sexual, and Now, does all of this cheapen human life? Yes. Does it debase women to sexual objects, and people to the point of being nothing but a blood piñata? Yes. Even for blaxploitation, does it not indulge in some kind of hyper-masculine fantasy detached from any real social progress? Yes. So could you say exploitation is bad for you, on maybe a deeper moral level, perhaps? Yes. Am I not even a big fan of it generally as a genre? Yes. But just because it's not good for you, you know what? Neither is chips, ice cream, burgers or pizza or fried food. And that is where we return to Victory Gundam and the notion of exploitation. Because if you can enjoy it in moderation, if you can be a responsible adult, it's incredibly fucking fun. And this is my approach, and why, at least for Victory Gundam, I really dig it. Still, everything that makes Victory Gundam whack, as we are about to go into from this angle of serious art, makes Victory fun from the angle of treating it as a work of pseudo-exploitation. And more than that, if you approach it this way, suddenly lots of stuff which seems to be completely shit taste starts making a strange amount of sense. For example, the appearance of the Shrike Team, an all-female babe brigade. What do? They shove Uso into their boobs, act motherly, and also fucking die. Now this is a great example because trying to seriously pick apart the Shrike Team is an exercise in futility. Most of the Victory Gundam material doesn't even bother to mention them. Only Zionic translation has this Victory Gundam 30th anniversary excerpt. Interviewer. The subtlety of Uso's age was striking too. Amuro felt like a child among adults, whereas Uso's age places him squarely among children, a clear outsider on the battlefield. This alien presence also gives rise to the drama among adults. Tomino. The older ladies in the Shrike team certainly don't see Uso as a man, do they? They keep calling him boy, and Uso for his part doesn't feel any kind of sexuality, even when his face is buried in Lupe Chanel's bosom. To Uso, it's like taking a bath with his mother. On the other hand, he admires Katagina, but Uso's sense of sexuality is entirely based on my experience. As I've mentioned before, I grew up in Odawara City, Kanagawa Prefecture, where my father worked at a junior high school. Many of his students were innkeepers, and we often visited their houses and used their baths. Back then, the Hakone Yamato had a public bathhouse with 1,000-person capacity, and it was co-ed. I loved being the first one in the bath, and when beautiful older girls came in pairs, I would just think, oh, they're pretty. I never made a fuss about bathing with the opposite sex, and I never understood men who did. Driven to make another Gundam, this latent, weird complex within Tomino emerged. For years, I've heard people offer theories as to why the Shrike team are what they are, that it was Tomino getting revenge on a studio mandate for more female pilots. It was Tomino attempting to sabotage the series out of displeasure, really showing those woke Bandai guys what for. And he complains. Trust me, he complains about corporate fucking meddling. In recollections, quite often. He said it in regards to the Motorad army, and of the series in the Blu-ray interview, his pretty brutally honest words say, Tomino, what I'm grateful for now about Victory Gundam is that such a terrible work stayed on the air for a whole year just because it had Gundam's name attached to it. I thought it was really amazing, but at the same time it shows the people involved weren't thinking about it. I'd just say, Victory Gundam, it's mediocre, and leave it at that. That's because it was simply left unattended with the feeling of, it's the same as always. But no evidence, zero evidence, emerges in regards to the Shrike team bubbles up. Why do this beautiful women group show up, be motherly to Uso, and then just get themselves brutally killed? Here exactly is how the exploitation approach works phenomenally. Who cares? When they each die brutal deaths, I don't philosophize on Tomino, I hear the riff. I'll still try to unpack it later as best as I can, but it's mainly the riff. But what about Duker Ik? The man, the legend, a Zanskar pilot who shows up with his giant motorcycle unit of attack bikes. The wonders of lunar titanium and Minovsky reactor applied to the Harley-Davidson, probably the Yamaha. I could once again wax poetic about what this means in regards to warfare, or try to tie it into the fictional development of the mobile suit. But with the exploitation mindset, I don't need to. Instead, I think of the Italian giallo classic, The Police Ask for Help, given the English title, What Have They Done to Your Daughters?, about a psychopath who murders young women and rides a motorcycle. I think about The Girl on a Motorcycle, the erotic 1968 film which got an X rating and helped inspire Fujiko Mine of Lupin. Or what about the 1970 Japanese Bosozoku film series Stray Cat Rock, starting with female juvenile delinquent leader? What, did I forget to mention Japan also had exploitation movies? Of course they did. The 1970s saw the proliferation of pinku, essentially Japanese movies based around cheap thrills, sex, and violence. But as the two-wheeled steed, motorcycles are primal. While machines, they are literally the smallest metal thing a rockin' dude or action babe can drive, while also preferably firing a minigun, or perhaps in a bikini. When Duker Ik says the incredibly powerful line about becoming unstoppable by reviving the motorcycles of the Middle Ages and the tradition of biking, sure, I could spend time and effort painstakingly considering how, to the living members of the universal century, motorcycles are at least hundreds of years old, and how anthropologically, this and that, but do you hear that? Do you hear that beautiful noise? It sounds like a motherfucking VMAX engine, baby. Which really gets us back to the main man, Uso. With each death, Uso is driven more and more, worse and worse, into suffering. And I know Tomino wants me to feel for this kid. I kinda do, but I feel for Uso the way I feel for Ash from Evil Dead sawing his evil hand off. Do I even need to say, the riff? And this will continue through the rest of the show. The worse things get, the more Uso suffers, the more women shove their breasts into his face, the more motorcycles show up, and all the while Uso grows more and more proficient at killing. If you try to watch it sincerely, all these grating, jagged elements will catch you. Maybe you are into an endless number of older chicks showing up and dying, but you are sick in the head. Me, for my sake, I just focus on the sweet hyperviolence and lap it up. Lap it up like a 13-year-old drawing X-Wings and TIE fighters in the corners of their schoolbook, and then scratching them out in imaginary space battles. Do I feel legitimate pity for the Zanskar pilot who blows himself up after finding out he lost to a child? Who dies from the raw shame of being bested by a young boy? Hell no! But it's fucking rad as fuck! Now here, maybe someone could say, but Argon, please, what about the fact that many episodes don't have necessarily guitar riff tier stuff happening? For example, in episode 12, Let's Get Rid of the Guillotine. All in all, it's a fairly serious episode showing what is perhaps, based on Sagrada Familia, Barcelona in Spain. It shows the citizens of Earth, including a local old man, die as they try to revolt. Surely this must channel at least some of the very real resistance Barcelona and Catalonia had historically, right? The fascist Spanish government occupying the city at the end of the Spanish Civil War of 1939, right? Crushing its attempt at democratic resistance. Nope. Because that's just how exploitation is, baby. Exploitation movies and the related genres are more than happy to use gruesome, painful, sacrosanct history, like World War II, to pervert and corrupt it for cheap thrills. So when I see these elements coexist with the annihilation of the Shrike team or the wackiness of the insane stuff later into the show, it doesn't diminish the schlocky vibe. No, it enhances it. With episodes 15 and 16, we finally have the cast launch into space. Following after them is the aging Klopp-class ship, the Reinforce. As the battles move to space, everything mentioned here continues. We also get our first hints at the upcoming Motorad army and its fucking motorcycle battleships. Do I even need to say anything, really? Speaking of all that motorcycle stuff, I think it's about time to move on to... As the gang gets into space, I will compliment Victory here on something rather good. That being that the Ligue Militaire goes on the offensive super fast and super hard. Pretty much as soon as the plot goes space-side, they begin attacking Zanskar's assets and fleets in orbit. This takes us to Hyland, an orbital microwave power satellite, which Zanskar was attempting to use to power their Omega cannon in orbit. What I like about this is that actually it's a part of the original High Frontier setup O'Neill wrote about. In order to build multi-kilometer-long colonies in space, vast networks of much smaller power and fuel and resource satellites would be required. Highland here in Victory would have dated back perhaps 100 years to that initial construction boom. A solar power satellite, dozens of kilometers squared in surface area. Over the next few episodes we see some other fun space battle elements pop up. The return of Gundam's staple dummy balloons, as well as in episode 22, where they strap bits of metal and wiring to make their tiny ship seem much larger on the radar return. We also see Zanskar's home colony cluster up close, including a colony no doubt once again modeled on the physical model built for F-91. The use of the cute fishbone mobile suit carrying patrol boats, as well as Zanskar's main ship designs, are pretty neat. Their radially and bilaterally symmetrical layouts are actually what you would ideally want in space. Because in zero-gravity environments, you want your center of thrust to align with your center of mass. This makes the vehicle or vessel move in a straight line. When you have thrusters offset from the main mass of the ship, over time a slight directional bias would develop. So radially symmetrical spacecraft are the optimal solution, with bilaterally symmetrical also having a very well-balanced thrust layout. Speaking of those designs, I guess I should mention the man who was responsible. A man now almost synonymous with Gundam. Hajime Kotoki. Kotoki got his start, like Makoto Kobayashi, with designs and kit bashes for model graphics, and their series Gundam Sentinel. Kotoki then got his animation debut with 0083 Stardust Memory. but it would be with Victory that his work on the mainline Gundam TV show, and not just an OVA, occurred. I would go as far as to say it was his influence which shaped Victory's designs to be as sleek and appealing as they are, but it would also be dishonest to say it was just Katoki. Before we return to him, I need to mention the two other important mechanical designers. Now, probably surprising very few folks is the fact Okawara once more returned to a Tomino-headed Gundam project. From the Victory Gundam mini-album. Okawara. I designed the Zolo, Zoloat, Tomilat, Gun-EZ, and Gadlov, as well as the Einrad and the Motorad ships. The wooden model I created at the initial stage for use as the new Gundam didn't take the core fighter into account. In short, it was a Federation design with a Zolo upper body, and it ultimately became the basis for the Zolo. The Zolo's compound eyes were an instruction by the director. Then I added eyelids to give it some expression. I've already done a lot with silhouettes and so forth in the Gundam world, so I'm leaving the rest up to the directors. And as for the helicopters, in live action they'd probably create an eerie and frightening atmosphere, but maybe they didn't quite work in anime. The beam rotor setting was invented purely with the drawing workload in mind. After all, when they stop, you don't have to draw them. I personally am a big fan of the Gun-EZ, as a series equivalent to the GM. The simple neutral space, nice dark gray, green coloring actually also landing pleasantly close to a modern military aircraft coloring. But as you may have grasped from that quote, Okawara's initial proposal for the V didn't win out. The one that did was Katoki's. From the same V Gundam mini-album. Katoki. When the Victory Gundam was being designed, the request from the director was that A, B, and C parts should transform and combine, with a total height of about 15 meters. So I built and presented a kind of mock-up using plastic model parts, just to show the transformation. It was like a design competition. As a result, they decided to go with my design for the Victory Gundam, and the core fighter was turned into a plastic model, more or less unchanged from how it was back then. The first thing on my mind while designing it was the balance of the A and C parts. I didn't want to create an extreme disparity. Recently, the lower bodies of robots have gotten bigger, and the upper bodies have shrunk. If I left that alone, the C parts alone would have been huge, and the A parts would have been nothing but hands. That's why I attached the skirts to the A parts. Now here, interestingly, much like in F91, the continuation of the shorter, 15-meter mobile suit has stuck around. But the thing that I actually really love about this weird gimmick, at least when it comes to the Victory, is because of Uso's amazing launched the boots trick. When in doubt, just detach the legs. Early on, it's an evasive maneuver, but by this point in the show, that changes. Now here in outer space, the mass-produced nature of the Victory suit enables Uso to effectively use the friggin' boots as anti-ship missiles. A completely toyetic design choice converted into a practical weapon. To me, this is one of the goofiest and most hilarious and also most enjoyable Victory Gundam aspects. The Gundam, the hero machine, its sacred space astronaut samurai warrior body, an extension through mecha of the protagonist in his battles. Yet here, lol no, it's a friggin' leg-shaped space missile. Later in episode 43, this gets completely fucking absurd, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Returning to Katoki for a moment. Katoki. Overall, I tried not to make it as extravagant as a Double Zeta. I made it as simple as possible to the point of looking weak, but I'd already done a simple Gundam in the form of 0083's GP03, so this time I designed it using mainly curved lines. I thought that might reduce the number of lines, which was something I was aiming for to make it easier to animate. But since I did that on my own, assuming it would make things easier at the production site, I think it also created some misunderstandings. Then, there are the round parts on places like the waist. These are hardpoints. There was a plastic model called the F90 with polycaps that let you attach and remove parts. So I was wondering if that would be possible here. That's where I got the idea. The beam shield gimmick is also something I proposed on my own. Then I wrote it on the sketch, let's do something weirder. But it unexpectedly stuck. This is interesting as the use of very jet aircraft coded hardpoints has been something many Gundams have played with, which usually get integrated to varying degrees. Jikwaku, for example, uses very obvious big hardpoints. As to the beam thing he mentioned, I believe it's the way the Victory's beam sabers are actually also its beam shield emitters. The saber's head is rotated sideways. I had no idea before looking through the technical drawings myself. Of course, the process of designing the Victory went through several stages, as did its backpack equipment and additional weapons. This leads to perhaps one of my favorite mid-series upgrades in the V2. The integration of the V concept directly into the Wings of Light was always something I felt must have been a big inspiration for Jehudi in Zone of the Enders. While sleeker, however, the V2 doesn't eject and ram its legs into stuff as much, so, I have to deduct points for that. Really, Katoki summed it up well in regards to the difference. In the new type V Gundam collection. Katoki. The V1 was trying for a standard kind of appeal, but the V2 we built on that, and I'm confident we've been able to establish lines unique to the Victory type. Of course, it's worth mentioning the third member, who I would say is the most overlooked member of the three main mechanical designers. Junya Ishigaki, who also helped fill in on the various baddies. Ishigaki's role here would be as the third man, but he would work again on many other Gundams, such as X, Wing, and Unicorn. From the Victory Gundam mini album. Ishigaki. This is the first time they're letting me do some main designs, and I'm also designing things like accessories for each episode, and the Federation spaceships, other than the Reinforced Junior. As for mobile suits, there's also the Shoku, Godzilla, Rikarl, Memedorza, Shaitard, Kontio, Galgyu, Abigor, James Gunn, and Javelin. I'm trying to design more interesting things, basing them on Mr. Okawara's standard ones. Then I'll turn in a first draft and start going back and forth with the director. Of course, the one that changed the most was the Shoku, the first one I worked on. Come to think of it, it was a bit of a stopgap measure. To change the visual impression, I tried to alter the crotch and ankle joints as much as I could, without affecting the movement. I also considered variations of the face and eyes, aiming to make them as interesting as possible. With the Godzilla, at first I was thinking of slits that open to become a single compound eye. As for the Sanhoj that appears in the opening, the staff called it a spider, and they let me do that one because I begged them to. Even drawing the roughs was really fun. From now on, a variety of mobile suits and mobile armors will appear, from the basic ones to really weird ones. This will come much later, but there'll be some mobile armors you'd never imagine, so please look forward to that. For example, there's one like a deep-sea fish. Now I don't know about you, but something about these designs friggin' screams 90s. It's the colors, I think. Obviously, other mobile suits from other 90s Gundams exist, but Victory seems to have just that, really specific, bordering on neon 90s kind of pastel color palette for a lot of the baddies. I, in general, really like the aesthetic of much of them. I like how simple they are in comparison to modern mechanical design. Largely, though, I love them as what they are. Disposable baddies for Uso to make pink explodey. As far as the general mooks go, I don't mind them overall, but I do find it funny how much we have both Okawara still trying to do a bit of the Shikaki Dogu approach, while Ishigaki tries to work in more of the Wasp theme of Bespa. What, you don't know about the Wasp thing? Bespa, with the Japanese BV blurring, comes from Vespa, like the scooter, Latin for wasp. But I don't blame you, the theming is inconsistent. Of course, I couldn't move on without mentioning something very special. To me, perhaps, the coolest looking main ship of a Gundam series. The Katoki-designed Reinforced Junior. Assembled from a kit bash of the original Klopp-class Reinforce and the Squid-class cruiser in the aftermath of the battles in space, I kind of adore it. Why? I think it's the lines, honestly. It's got this great silhouette which rises and extends very sleekly. There's just a great series of shapes making it up. The big radiator panels and the huge long central prow. I really like how that prow also has a beam shield integrated into it, showed on a kind of macro scale application of the technology. It's also very unique in that aspect, as most Gundam spacecraft lack shields entirely. Even with the prevalence in other series of things like eye fields, a lot of them just outright omit this. And yes, these two lower guns have no real firing arc. Yeah, the remnant anti-aircraft weaponry are also cut off by the engine section, but all of that, I really don't mind. So, in general, when a lot of Gundam ships are descendants of the somewhat dorky white-based Sphinx, I really dig how the Reinforced Junior turned out. And for those of you who know what happens later in the show, yeah, you know why this thing is especially friggin' cool. As one last fact about my favorite ship, at one point instead of Reinforce, it was going to be called Gilgamesh in the original Clock class, which means this upgraded version would have been named the Gilgamesh Junior. Oh well, it's a missed opportunity. Argon, that's great and all. Yeah, ain't it? But where's all that exploitation stuff you just mentioned last sec? Oh boy, howdy! Do you think that ain't coming back real fast? Let's descend further into the Garden of Madness. So, as the League Militaire carries out its main assault in the background, Uso and the younger members begin going about in the foreground. As the League successfully assaults and captures Zanskar's gigantic space laser, a few more members join from the young folks of Highland. Tomáš Masaryk, who, yes, is named after the first president of Czechoslovakia, as well as these two girls who, I don't know, they kind of fade into the background a bit. Listen, Victory has, like, a lot of characters. They mainly exist as love interests for Odilo and Warren. We also see a lot of elements emerging as attempts to reuse ideas from F91. Centrally, Shakti's mother is the queen/religious figure of Zanskar, Maria. Much like the idea was supposed to work in F91, here in Victory, she essentially serves to bind the political power of Zanskar around a gentle religious aspect. The Victory proposal has a great line here about how the Gati party under Fonzie Kagati, it's kind of like the political core, which made use of her. Even the Gati party, which had built Zanskar using a combination of the honey of women's rights and the whip of the guillotine, found themselves in a situation where they had to use Earth to realize a controlled society. This is the current state of this story. Uso also reunites with one of the two parents who abandoned him on Earth, his mother, who much like in F91 helped design and build the Gundam. This linking of all the main characters to their parents being the main folks in the background of Zanskar and the League is pretty directly a continuation of F91's family focus. However, I can't help but feel it may shrink the scale of the conflict a bit too much as a side effect. It makes the conflict feel very relatable and clearly based around some kind of intimate idea of connections, but it also makes the world feel a lot smaller. Wow, Argon, I don't know, that all still sounds like at the very least some kind of interesting or oddly weird and entertaining element. Once again, how does this exploitation... Junko fucking explodes attempting to defuse a bomb planted on the Omega laser in episode 27. The damage forces, I'm doing air quotes, Uso to pull the trigger on the giant fucking Omega cannon. So that, yes, the 13-year-old is the one who, takes out possibly hundreds of thousands of lives in the fleet around Side 2. Or put another way, another woman violently dies so the boy child can mass murder. Do you get it? The freak is still there. We also have one of the other surviving Shrike team be downright suicidal in wanting to protect Uso to the point she basically gets herself killed as well. And that ain't even mentioning the bath scene in 29. But if you know what that is, you know why I'm gonna save it for the next section. This is also the Mobile Suit section, so it's time to get to the single raddest space fleet in Gundam. After being hinted at episodes earlier, the Motorad army, the friggin' motorcycle battleship fleet, emerges. Thanks to Duker X's input, they have applied the invincible power of the motorcycle to battleships. With this new fleet, Zanskar will do what obviously the only thing you would ever do with this is. Go to the moon, where the anti-Zanskar forces are, and the capital of the Federation, and physically friggin' drive over them. Pretty much the second to last quarter of the show is focused on this fucking absurd setup. Just like a good exploitation story. Marbet and her fiancé Oliver also get married in the prison camp while being held hostage. Then, just a few episodes later, after Uso gets the V2, yes, in the bath episode, and mere episodes later, Oliver kamikaze rams his core fighter into the ship on the moon in desperation. But that's nothing really. They pursue the Motorad fleet as it moves to Earth. The Motorad fleet also deploys the powerful new Einrad mobile suit, the monocycle thing in pitched battle, as the League Militaire and Uso pursue them. Argon, how can they produce thrust in space? Reaction wheels only reorient a craft. They can't... Shh, I'm talking about the Motorads here, okay? They enter Earth's atmosphere, and the Zanskar begin the extremely schlocky Chikyu Klinu Saksen, or Earth Clean Operation. What is that? Why? They're gonna drive the motorcycle battleships over the cities of Earth, clearly. It's as rad and as stupid as it sounds, and I love it. It's funny that according to Tomino, this was forced by some higher executive at Sunrise, from the DVD interviews. Interviewer. So the bike battleships weren't there from the start of planning. Tomino. Not at the beginning. Around the time we began production, I was summoned to the Bandai head office, and for the first time in my life, and this person directly ordered me to put in bike battleships. And since that's how it was created, it's the work of Bandai that's expressed in every aspect of the design logic. The people at Bandai now may not like it, but that conversation was the result of somebody who had overwhelming power at Bandai exercising his authority. At the time, Bandai was also preoccupied with the hobby business, so you may have thought that all their programs and production companies had to be toy-oriented in order to boost sales. The Ligue Militaire has the handicap of trying not to fight mobile suit to mobile suit, and limit damage. As such, suit reactors going critical, those are not so great for the polluted and still recovering Earth. Zanskar, on the other hand, doesn't give a shit, and outright wants to purge and literally flatten the Earth in domination. It is during this that Uso's mother is revealed to have been captured, and in desperation, one of the Zanskar baddies, which has been around this entire series but isn't super memorable, Pippininen, decides to do the most delightfully nuts strategy possible. Physically have her held hostage in the hands of a mobile suit to prevent Uso from attacking it. Don't get me wrong, Amuro's dad in 0079 is in a bad spot, and Zeta's Camille and his parents are both used or held hostage to tragic fates. But this is happening in essentially the main and final arc of the show. But what happens, Argon? Just how bad does it get? Oh, actually, in the heated battle, one of the other motorcycle battleships is blasted towards the bigger main one. It impacts and gores Uso's mother in front of his eyes. And in the most sadistic way possible, a ceasefire is then declared between Zanskar and the Federation, before Uso can enact any violent cathartic retribution whatsoever. So we get to see our 13-year-old boy protagonist hold the helmet, which is implied to hold the beheaded remains of his mother, while in complete shock. I mean, come on, right? Do you see what I mean? Trying to take this moment completely seriously, I'd say, is almost futile. Anime can have strange moments which are both absurd and serious, but the tone, the devilishly sadistic nature of putting Uso through it all, I mean, come on. The following episodes then are no better. Uso barely having time to grieve or process this is just added trauma to the, veritable Shaggy and Scooby-Doo sandwich pile of suffering. The League forces do battle with Duker Ik, now in command of his own motorcycle battleship, which is also a submarine, by the way. And then in episode 38, both Duker Ik and his female love interest die, and they get a completely gratuitously self-indulgent post-death sequence, which would make JoJo's Cloud Afterlife seem quaint. Once more, trying to justify this logically fails. Duker Ik is no Ramaral. He's a D-lister baddie behind the rest of Zanskar's rulers. Why, at all, does this friggin' character of all of them get such a fucking sanctimonious send-off? It doesn't make any sense. But if we, like myself, sees this as a rad send-off for the motorcycle, very cool, guy, in that exploitative and over-the-friggin' top way, it all comes together actually rather perfectly. Ride shiny and chrome on the highways of Valhalla, Duker Ik. With that, we come to episode 39, and the gang has returned to Casarelia. A brigade of Zolo pilots, the mooks from the series start, face off against Uso. Do I even need to write the next line? Uso, fully powered up with trauma, beats them all. Their leader is, of course, a man with a family who is sympathetic and wants to settle on Earth. But he's also a suicidal militant, so Uso, of course, kills his ass. At this point, with the return to Casarelia, it would probably be fair to say that it feels kind of like victory has been, going in circles, maybe spinning its wheels, in terms of the plot and characters and arcs and movement. So with that in mind, I think it's high time to do and focus on one of Tomino's most confusingly malicious bad girls ever put to painted cell, and deal with the blonde she-wolf that's been in the room the entire time. Anyone who knows about Victory knows about the big bad of the series. No, despite his masked face, Chronicle Asher is, at best, a loose recurring antagonist. The real loose antagonist, which does get the central baddie role at least, is of course Miss Loose, Katagina Loose. Now this has to be one of those characters people either absolutely fucking despise, if taken seriously, or just kind of scratch their heads at her as her arc doesn't seem to really add up. Like for comparison, right, another famous or infamous aspect of Victory Gundam is the Bikini Babe attack from much later on. This character design Tomino illustrated himself is essentially a gauntlet Uso has to endure as a boy on the cusp of the start of puberty and an actual libido. But the reason I started this review the way I did is because at the very least, as stupid as it is, that's the grinding of a creator, a storyteller, Mr. Old Man T, down to the pit of his complexes. Fundamentally, there is some extremely whack Freudian cross-wiring going on. The death drive of combat and the life drive of mothering and sexuality have essentially shorted. And what do we get? On the good side, the Shrike Team women, willing to die in some kind of motherly protection of Uso. Hell, even later on, other unrelated later female pilots basically literally doing the same thing. And as for the baddies, Koala Griffin, Lupa Shino, both are essentially tormented by the fact that Uso has this strange allure, which warps and kind of, tortures them. Despite this cross-wiring, they aren't capable of seeing him as a sexual partner, and thank God for that, Mr. T isn't a harem anime tier writer. But at the same time, they can't be mothers to him, and it drives them to sadistically pursue and torment Uso, killing his friends and compatriots. To the point, just to be free of this impulse, they attempt to kill him directly. They cast off the men they pretend to serve, as Fuala does with Tassilo, one of the Zanskar military leaders, and Lupe does as well with Pipiniden. All that drives them is this cross-wiring. But this is the thing. Like I said, it's not a jolly harem of garbage writing, where the audience easily self-inserts as Uso and can fantasize about all these older women. I mean, you can still try if you're some kind of sicko. No. The point is to drop Uso down a version of Dante's Inferno, if Dante had a real bad complex about older women. While rewatching recently, I started calling it the ONEE-SANS gauntlet Uso has to be tormented and passed through. Because, he's gonna end up with Shakti. That's really his true endpoint as a character, there's no mystery there. But sure enough, you might say. But there's a reason he doesn't go right there. The reason is the start of this section. Katagina. Now Katagina is different. See, Katagina is very different. Built on the same wire shorting out, but different. To get into it, I need to do something crazy. I need to tell you about, in essence, one of the very European ideas of a character. The she-wolf. The female survivor. World War II and the sex-death short-circuit wires being dropped into a bucket of race and ethnicity. But if I pull this off, woo boy, you owe me one, okay? In 1975, the horrifically iconic exploitation film Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS was made. Now I can't show you or go into too many details about this movie, because it's not just demonetized bad. I mean, who am I kidding? There's no way this video is staying monetized. But it's worse. It's terms of service violation bad. It's about a blonde Nazi SS officer who runs a concentration camp, and who repeatedly sleeps with and then mutilates and cuts the dinks off of fellas who can't satisfy her. It's a putrid film the wise elder Gene Siskel described as the most degenerate picture I have seen to play downtown. But it's born from that same perverse cross-wiring of extreme human violence and hatred mixing and fermenting with sexuality and dominance. Like I said, some strong Freudian stuff. But here's the catch. It was partially inspired by the real world. Ilse Koch was a real German war criminal who had committed horrific acts at the Buchenwald concentration camp. The American post-war media went bananas with some of the accounts and claims of what she did to her prisoners. But this isn't a video about that exactly. The main point is in the public's mind. How this image of a dominant woman could survive and be played up as a source of fetishistic fantasies. Argon, what the Christ does that have to do with victory? Stay with me, and you'll see. Because in 1979, Rainer Werner Fassbinder directed The Marriage of Maria Braun. Now this one ain't an exploitation movie, really. This is a buttoned-up suit and tie, serious artistic work. You can maybe pass this one by great-grandma if she doesn't mind reading the subtitles. In it, the main character, Maria Braun, gets married to her husband while Allied bombs fall overhead. He vanishes into Germany's Eastern Front and is presumed dead. To survive, Maria post-war takes advantage of her looks and works as a prostitute in the German world. She sleeps with the occupying American servicemen. As Germany reconstructs itself, She eventually works her way up to being the mistress and personal secretary of a powerful and wealthy industrialist. She takes utmost advantage of her sexual appeal and looks to get ahead. And towards the end of the film, once her husband returns after many other events, they both die tragically as Germany wins the 1954 World Cup. In that way, Maria is like a living metaphor for Germany herself. A survivor, doing what was needed to survive, taking advantage through her looks or her charms, sleeping with the right people, while also easily betraying or sliding into whatever new position was to her advantage. Are you starting to get it? Don't worry. If you ain't, I only got one more. And this one is the big one. In 1964, Ernest Lustig, a Czech Jewish writer, wrote a book. This book was about a group of wealthy American Jews captured by the Nazis in Italy. In it, the wealthy men repeatedly tried to bribe their way out of their inevitable execution at the hands of their captors. The Nazis are essentially just milking them for cash, and were never going to let them go. But amongst their group is one woman, a young woman, who endures all the humiliation of being both Jewish and a female within the system. She is the only one in the end who is brave enough to steal a pistol and kills at least a few dozen of their SS captors before she, like the rest, is captured, executed, and their bodies burnt. The woman's name is Katerina, and the book, later turned into a movie in 1965, is A Prayer for Katerina Horovitsova. Now those returning viewers shouldn't be too surprised. As you know, this is the part of the video where I drop the evidence tying this all together. From the Victory Gundam Blu-ray box interview with Tomino. Interviewer: nonetheless, I had no idea you were so fond of Katajina. Tomino: really? I like the name Katajima Luz, too. The reason it suddenly occurred to me to bring that up is because just 1 hour ago I remembered the source of the name Katajina. Interviewer: wait, there was a source? Tomino: I don't think most people nowadays would know this, but given the name of the Katajina character and the keyword Eastern European literature, knowledgeable people should instantly be able to place it. I saw it in a volume of an Eastern European literature collection some time ago, and wanted to imbue Katajina with the feeling I found there. Which, as Mark Simmons thankfully tracked down in his studious work, was: this story appears to be a prayer for Katerina Horovitsova by the Czech Jewish author Ernest Lustig, which was included in Complete Works of Modern Eastern European Literature 2. But of course, I ain't done. From the same Blu-ray interviewer, hearing that it's rooted in Eastern European literature, I can understand where this narrative begins and ends in Casarelia. Tomino: Eastern European literature has a unique atmosphere, but I think that kind of introverted, refractive feeling is something Japanese people don't understand at all, so it's hard to get used to it. They have a history of being occupied over and over again, without acknowledging it, even though they're enduring it every day as they live their lives. And then if you're Jewish, you're in on an even more complicated social position. When I went to Prague, I recorded the Victory Gundam soundtrack. I wandered out as far as Auschwitz. This was before it became a World Heritage Site, so it wasn't as well maintained as it is now. I couldn't bring myself to look at the incinerator, so I was just looking at the surrounding scenery. While I basked in the sun by a building at the entrance, the women walking by outside the site were cheerful, with sturdy, healthy physiques. I had the strange sensation that in these women, the anxieties in Eastern European literature and the Holocaust that once took place were all overlapping, without overlapping. But that experience gave me the conviction that Katajina's direction wasn't a mistake. So Victory Gundam became a mixture of the feeling that I had to do something with this Katajina, and my frustration about the tired battleships. So get it? Like, was I right or what? Come on, you know? That's what this character is. This photographic imprint peeled off of European art, but really, the messy and miserable European history. World War II, the cruelty of the Nazis, and the complex identity of being at the same time a woman. How being Jewish further turns you into this necessary idea of a she-wolf, a survivor. So, to answer, why the hell is she like this? The answer is, as I have now shown thusly, that she is a part Ilsa, tormented by the crossing of sex drive or motherhood and the death drive of violence. She's part Maria Braun, agreeing to the cruelties of those in power to get ahead. And of course, she is also very, very much Katajina. Now, having said all that, you could then ask, but is it done well? Did Tomino actually manage to bring across this idea? Well, as he says himself, not exactly. Like, some of it is there, but it also feels like something which takes too long in the plot to really emerge as the final antagonist to Uso. In a lot of ways, it feels like Tomino needing something to build up as, Uso's final fight. And it's batty, considering Chronicle Asher is so whatever as well. That being said, it is extremely whack. And I don't really know about you, but I'm having a hard time thinking of, like, another work, let alone, like, an anime work or a mecha anime work, which dared to try this exact kind of character. So yeah, it does end up being and thusly kind of entertaining. And hey, as far as the women go, Marbet is pretty solid, she pilots through the whole show and survives, and the girls from Highland, they help out and they're solid. They're still orbiting as, either weird mother characters to Uso or romantic interest to others, but they don't all violently die, so, there's gotta be a few points for that at least. And so with the final arc of the show, this is all that is left. Being attacked in Casarelia, the main cast and the Reinforced take off to space to confront the last assault of the Zanskar and their super weapon, the Angel Halo, so we can make our final attack as well. In the now infamous Victory Gundam DVD release, Tomino had the following to say. Tomino, this DVD is unwatchable, so don't buy it. If you ask me whether Victory Gundam was really such a mess as a work, I'd simply say that it just didn't give everything enough thought. I should take this opportunity to clearly state that it's a truly terrible work, so I'd like to somehow put the following words on the band around the DVD box. This DVD is unwatchable, don't buy it. I think a ban like that would be most accurate, and that's not just rhetoric. If it were possible, I'd want to do it. Don't buy it just because it has the Gundam name. Something like that would be an act of sincerity towards people 20 years younger than myself. Although, this is why I hate today's Japan. But if they really put up posters like that, this DVD would probably sell really well. Interviewer, people would definitely buy it. Tomino, that's what I hate about it. Now, when this came out many years ago, I heard people take this as an admission that Victory was bad. Like, really bad. Even worth just outright skipping. But perhaps, much to the chagrin of Tomino of that interview, all this did back then was pique my interest. When I read the threads which mentioned that Uso Ewan has the highest kill count of any on-screen Gundam protagonist, only behind Amuro if you count all of his kills from Zeta and Char's counterattack, that really made me go, okay, what the hell is this show? But if you want to know what really locked in my approach to making this video, it's from a bit further in that same DVD interviewer. I think there are also many fans who, when they watch Victory Gundam, see it as an event rather than simply reacting to it as a work, as if there was a documentary quality to how the work itself ended up. In that sense, I'd like to ask about the background and circumstances of the production. Tomino, it was a work from 1993, right? To any viewers who had any feeling that Victory Gundam's TV series wasn't as much an anime as a documentary about Sunrise at that time, I can say that's exactly the case. And with this series, I myself can tell you that the reason it ended up like this wasn't because of the work called Gundam, but because it was completely entangled in business logic. But specifically, there's a part right here. Tomino, as an example from the history of the Japanese film industry, Nikkatsu is the easiest way to understand it. Nikkatsu originally started out taking the literary route, trying to maintain its dignity as a certain kind of film company. Then it turned to borderless action movies, using even stars like Yujiro Ishihara only for those kinds of works. As audience members continued to decrease, it moved into Roman porno. Soon, even that decline, and even it now survives only as a small business. Drawing an analogy to that kind of management transition in the film industry, we can say that Victory Gundam corresponds to Roman porno. Thus, the moment the production of Victory Gundam ended, the artisanal production company called Sunrise came under the umbrella of the huge corporation called Bandai. And in fact, the pain of that transfer of management control is expressed in the work itself. So as you can see, even Big Man T said it himself. Victory Gundam was the disintegrating of the standards of Sunrise, to the point he felt that it was the Roman porno of Gundam. Roman porno was Nikatsu making full nudity films in desperation in the 70s, as Japanese audiences shifted to home TV. It was right on the border of the outright pornographic pinku films, or basically, put another way, the cheap thrills and smutty, lurid appeal of violence and sex. You know, kinda like, exploitation movies. So do you get it? That DVD interview happened now over 20 years ago. But 10 years ago, Tomino and his thoughts on Victory had shifted. So before we conclude the story, I think those would be a good contrast as well. Tomino. Unfortunately, all I remember about Victory Gundam is being forced to do things that I really hated. Interviewer. You've already said as much, and yet. Tomino. Before Victory Gundam, there was this failure of the Mobile Suit Gundam F91. The movie was supposed to be the first part, and after that we were going to develop it into a TV series. But that never happened. That's because the hero Seabook and the heroine Cecily didn't work as characters. Anyway, given that situation, it was decided to start the next Gundam over from scratch. Unlike F91, which was created by staying completely within the traditions of Gundam, I thought it might be better to introduce more elements focused on children and parent-child relationships. I set out to properly establish the subject of family as a theme, but in that area, the depiction of Uso and his family were also major failures. Interviewer. Why did they fail? Tomino. With Victory Gundam, I wanted to use family dispersed all over the world as subject matter, but in doing so, I created too much distance between Uso and his parents, so it didn't end up looking like a family story. As a result, I feel the main old theme of Victory Gundam fell by the wayside. In Eastern Europe, it's not that unusual for families to live apart, but since I'd never had that experience myself, I was unable to come up with episodes that could be understood in a straightforward way. Here, I have to agree with the old man quite a bit. I think Victory struggled greatly to convey this. But you know what 2015 Tomino felt differently about from 2004 Tomino? Well, interviewer. The only thing you should never have done. Tomino. Denying the tire battleships. Interviewer. You shouldn't have denied them? Tomino. That's right. About 10 years ago, there was a Gunpla exhibition where they displayed a fairly rough model of the battleships. When I saw that, I was able to completely disavow my feelings of disgust from the time of broadcast, at having the tire battleships forced on me by the sponsor. This is just fine for anime, I thought. The nice thing about the hand-drawn anime is that it can accept something that ridiculous. And look at the live-action Avengers movie, where giant aircraft carriers are flying in the sky. Even in live action, they can brazenly do things like that without the story losing its plausibility. It should be even more natural that we can do that in anime. So I've come to realize that I was wrong about the thing that most disgusted me at the time of broadcast. About 20 years have passed since Victory Gundam, but from what I've learned in that time, the only thing I should never have done was go along with something while being disgusted by it. See? I told you they were friggin' rad. Motorad. But kick-ass bikes aside, as I began with Victory, it's very much about a man being ground down by changing times and yet forced to make the big thing again. The final arc of the show then, I won't recap in excruciating detail, but briefly. Unsurprisingly for a Tomino series, there is a big mega boss ship space station. For Victory, it's the Angel Halo, a device filled with psychikers, literally thousands of them, essentially a giant psychic phased array. With Maria and later Shakti at its center, it amplifies their latent abilities to broadcast good vibes huge distances. Unfortunately, as you can expect, the baddies want to use it to essentially brain rot the Earth into narcolepsy. You know, typical Series N desperation of baddies Tomino stuff. Now what does this mean to the philosophy of the new type? I have no idea, and I don't think Tomino did either. It simultaneously confirms the collective power of the wills of new types to do things like push asteroids away, but we already knew that from the previous works. In another way, it mechanistically breaks them down into literally nothing more than cogs in a big Ezekiel wheel, machine thing. Does the series make good on the notion that it went with in its proposal? Did Victory channel some notion of matriarchy in Maria, Shakti's mother? It could barely handle normal motherhood, let alone politically backed motherhood. Okay, but what about all the dissolution political stuff? Once again, it's a big At the end, the Federation does send a fleet of ships to help break Zanskar's back. The not General Revel character bravely ramming the Rakayum class flagship into the enemy. The Federation does look like a rotting rump state, but as is usual for Gundam, we don't dwell on it. As also is more typical, a pattern, the big bads get axed one by one. Maria and the Zanskar leadership get killed, and Shakti goes back and forth into the Angel Halo to try to end things non-violently. Many friendly characters die. Uso confronts Chronicle and ultimately defeats him as well. Haro, smash cut! I told you Haro killed someone big. The highlight of this death really is the old men of the Reinforced Junior kamikaze ramming their ship into the enemy fleet while a fucking rad insert song plays. It's beautifully hardcore, and the subsequent explosion takes out the defensive fleet. If Victory nails one thing here in the final stretch, it's absolutely the older generation going out in a blaze of glory for the younger generation's benefit. All of which builds up to the big confrontation with Katagina. Uso uses V2's Wings of Light, and Shakti's Will for Peace literally flush the remaining Zanskar up into space. In the process, many of the psychics on board also have perished. We conclude our series as it began in Casarelia. Uso and Shakti are living together back in their old home, and the survivors of the war visit. Unlike Maria, or Ilsa, or her original namesake, Katagina does end up surviving, but is physically blinded and mentally scarred. Some may say it's unsatisfying, but somehow it seems the perfect cruel punishment for an antagonist who betrayed whoever she needed to be forced to painfully, brutally, pathetically linger on. Uso has survived through the bloodbath of the war, and the snow falls in the late autumn on Casarelia. Now, I could end this here. Obviously enough, that wraps up the end of the late Universal Century, as directed by Old Man Tomino in the form of animated shows. But I ended last time noting on the effects of F91, and in particular mentioned one show, which would succeed quite notably just 2 years later after Victory. A show about a 14-year-old boy who goes through hell. If you haven't put it together yet, yeah, I don't think you get a mecha protagonist like Shinji Ikari without first having an Uso Ewan. Now here, I have saved an interview which was conducted over 30 years ago, and translated some 10 years ago previous by the Wave Motion Canon blog. In Animage 07-1994, interview between none less than Yoshiyuki Tomino and the creator of that work, Hideaki Anno. They talk of many things. In particular, Tomino speaks about how he endorses fully the subsequent work of G Gundam, which I hope to get to one day. They speak of Katagina and what her ending means. They speak of how anime has grown to kind of like become an Ouroboros, consuming itself in self-consumption. But the bit that jumped out at me is from towards the end, on the notion of the audiences of children and on the preference for safe and comforting media. Animage. Viewers' mindsets seem to be on the side of enjoying its safe, predetermined outcome. Tomino. Of course, they wouldn't like to face what they find the most gross or uncomfortable on mediums like video or anime. Anno. Since it's compensatory behavior, sure, they don't want to pay money to see repulsive things. In Victory Gundam, for instance, many kids stopped watching when Uso's mother died, saying they didn't want to watch an anime like this. Viewers react to people's death more than we expect. Tomino. No doubt there are kids like that. Animage. But now that the bubble has ended, there's the economic crisis and the climate is becoming more and more austere. So I think there will be changes from now on. Anno. On the contrary, I think they're going to lock themselves up even more. Tomino. Children nowadays lack the energy to live in these times. I think people actually suffering from autism wouldn't be able to live in such an environment. But I'm in the kind of position where even if there's only darkness one step ahead, I want to do my best until I die. At least I want to show that life is not so bad, even when we don't know what we're living for. Anno. I think people need a will to live to keep on living. They won't go on living unless they're repeatedly told to. If religion teach obvious things such as people must live even if they're suffering, it's probably because they need to be told so and to realize it in order to keep on living. Tomino. Exactly. That's how unforgiving the world is. Our only message is, be more prepared to it. But for children nowadays, particularly middle school and high schoolers, maybe it's their entire school life which causes them trouble. I think that's why they don't want to see depressing images, including the kinds of story they could, live themselves. But the other important thing is that there are children who actually take things as little as this harshly. Recently, there have been rice shortages from time to time, and it's a very good thing in my opinion. It allows them to imagine a little bit more seriously a case where there really isn't any more food. The advantage for people creating entertainment in that case is to be able to say, sorry if it's disturbing, but we're showing these austere parts in anime you like as well, in case it helps 10 or 20 years from now. Anno. Indeed, we must put a bit of poison inside our work, particularly for children. Tomino. I'm absolutely sure about this. From this, end of Victory Gundam, Evangelion is an obvious road, which as you can tell, stretches onward. However, as you probably also already know well, many other non-Tomino Gundams sit amidst this period of the 90s and beyond. For now though, as before, I will take a break from Gundam before pursuing those roads. As I've hopefully made very clear, this story is not a flawless series. It was Tomino grappling with turbulent times, but Victory Gundam is pretty. And that's why I still think it's rad.